All right.
All right, we will call the regular meeting of January 12th, 2021 to order. We have the flag for the Pledge of Allegiance, please. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, and with liberty and justice for all. Roll call, please.
John Douglas.
Here.
Michael Howry.
Here.
Michelle Hayes.
Here.
Brian Horvath.
Here.
Dean Sensi.
Here.
Is there a motion to approve the agenda?
I'll move.
I'll second.
Any discussion? Roll call.
John Douglas.
Yes.
Michael Howry.
Yes.
Michelle Hayes.
Yes.
Brian Horvath.
Yes.
Dean Sensi.
Yes.
Vote is 5-0.
All right, so we'll move on to board member reports, but to open this, we're going to start with two moments of silence. It's always sad to learn of someone's passing, especially when it is a member of our Madison family. Recently, we learned of the passing of David White, a former teacher, coach, principal, and guidance counselor, and retired from Madison Local Schools in 1990. Dave was born on September 18th, 1934 in Newell, West Virginia, and passed away on December 16th, 2020. He graduated from Wells High School in West Virginia, attended West Virginia University, and was honorably discharged as a captain from the Army. Dave married his wife, Marguerite, who preceded him in death on January 2nd, 1955. They raised three children together, Kimberly, Lisa, and Alan. Dave loved to travel, especially to Civil War battlefields. Dave will be missed by his children, grandchildren, nieces, nephews, and friends. All of us at Madison Schools extend our deepest and most sincere sympathy to Dave's family and friends. All right. Recently, we also learned of the passing of Donna Sabo, teacher and Board of Education member of the Madison Local Schools. Donna was born on November 1st, 1933 in Youngstown, Pennsylvania, and passed away on December 17th, 2020. She graduated as salutatorian of her high school class and went on to graduate from Pennsylvania State University. Donna taught high school English for several districts in Northeastern Ohio, including Madison. She also served 2 terms on the Madison Board of Education. Donna married her husband of 61 years, Jim, on August 15th, 1959, and together they raised 2 sons. She will be missed by her husband, Jim, sons Tim and Brian, and her 5 granddaughters. All of us at Madison Schools extend our deepest and most sincere sympathy to Donna's family and friends. Okay, I'd just like to add, Mrs. Sabo was my high school English teacher when I was in high school here in Madison. And I had a very good relationship with her, and her family is in the community still, obviously, with Sabo Nursery, and very much will miss her and appreciate all the things that she was able to impart on me when I was in high school. She was a great language arts teacher. So.
That's great.
Is there anyone wishing to give a board member report this evening?
No.
All right, we will open the public participation portion, the initial one for this evening. This is on agenda items only. Anyone wishing to address the board on an agenda item can do so. State your name and address for the board. You would have 5 minutes to address the board.
Okay, since we do have several people participating, I'm going to allow everybody to unmute, and then we'll go and use the old method of just muting everybody and then unmuting the board and administration. So as far as I know, that's been made available. Gretchen, are you able to unmute? Okay, so it is working. Thank you.
Are you seeing anything, Mike?
No, I'm not.
All right, well, we will close the first public participation portion tonight, and we'll move on to reports and recommendations of the treasurer.
Thank you. I'm going to do the mute all real quick here, and then you will have to unmute yourself. That should give everybody, the board, the opportunity to unmute themselves. Mike, are you able to unmute? Okay, good. All right. So I do have a presentation prepared for tonight. So I've got some slides. Let me see if I can get rid of this here. Okay. Got some slides that I want to talk about. The first few slides show how we compare to other districts in Lake County. The new property valuations and tax rates were released a couple of weeks ago. Once again, we're second lowest when it comes to millage for operating levies. And again, for all taxes. We've been second lowest in the county since, no, at least since I got here and probably before that. So the other information that came out over the holiday break it's called the CUP report. It's the district profile report it has a bunch of financial information. It compares you to similar districts, and it also compares you to the state average. So the first slide is the revenue per pupil, and you can see all the way to the right is the Madison blue. We continue to be the lowest funded district in Lake County in terms of that revenue per pupil. We are 39th lowest out of the 607 districts in Ohio. We continue to provide the level of education we do with the lowest amount of funds. I don't know how well you can see this, but ours is $11,185 per student. And the highest recorded in Lake County is Perry at a little over 16,000. I say that because no information was provided for Wickliffe, which for some reason their revenue amounts were not included. And frankly, I'd never seen that before, where this report was issued with a district not having half of the picture being shown. So I'm not really sure why the statewide reports got released without that, but that's not too concerning to me because I know they were at least higher than Madison, and they've typically been on the higher end of this scale. Excuse me. So then the next slide is the expenditure per pupil. Again, we're lowest in Lake County and have been for at least 10 years. We're currently 79th out of the 607 districts. And again, we have no choice to be this low because we don't get much revenue. You know, we can constantly talk about, and Sean has said it, I've said it, we don't have a spending problem in this district, we have a revenue problem. So that's, you know, again, revenue, we're down there, we're more than $1,000 per pupil less than the next district, and we're about $500 less than the next district on expenditure per pupil. So any questions on that before I go into some of the things that are going to be changing on us? Okay. So the next item is, some things are could be changing from the 5-year forecast that the board approved back in September. If you recall, it was completed on September 21st, 2020. We do it based on the information that we have on hand. The current projected balance for the end of this year is about $43,000. And I think I remarked at a prior board meeting that good policy is to have 30 to 60 days cash reserve on hand. Ours is an hour and a half. So that's still a positive balance, and it allows us to certify our appropriations. But the big issue comes next year, 2022, when our projected balance, as of now, is a little over $2 million. So what might change? We received word a couple of weeks ago that the new stimulus bill will contain money for the schools. It's funded out of the Elementary and Secondary School Emergency Relief Fund, or ESSER. Last year in May, we received about $353,000, and we were told that this year's allocation could be about 4 times that amount, meaning about $1.4 million, and we're hoping we know by the end of January 2020, of this January. Now, will that be dollar for dollar reduction of a current year, or increase of a current year balance, or a decrease of the deficit next year? Probably not, but 90% of it is probably going to go to offset the deficit. We do have a requirement or a need for intervention for a summer program, and that's what those monies would be spent for. But the majority probably ought to go for offsetting the balance. The other item that we heard, I think it was last week, maybe before that, was the student success and wellness funds are going to be continued. The comment was made that he's 100% sure it's going to be in the governor's budget, but we don't know how much. And we don't know when we're going to know. The latest we should know is the end of June, since that's when they're supposed to set the budget cycle. So what does that mean? Well, currently, we have a fund set up for those types of expenditures that account for revenue and expenditures of $780,000 this year. It was $570,000 last year. If those funds are extended to next school year, whatever we get will relieve the general fund of an equivalent amount of expenditures. If we get $780,000, then it'll probably, it's about $700,000 that we would be able to redirect out of the general fund, reducing next year's deficit by $700,000. So in the 2 items that we talked about, from where we were just in September to where we are now, we could have a swing from 1.4 million to 2.2 million. And as we sit here today, I can't tell you whether it's going to be 0 or 2.2 million or some other number. So we are trying to figure out what we're going to do in the future based on 2 large pieces of information of financial help that this district could get. We have no control over, no idea when we're going to know, no idea how much it's going to be. So while we got these 2 items that will affect the balance for next year, the district continues to have negative ending balances in fiscal year 23, 24, and 25. We will have to address these by budget reductions, new source of revenue, or a combination of both. And as we know, let somebody in. As we know, one of the ways to increase revenue is with a tax levy. And, we've always done real estate tax levies in this district and most districts. But I wrote the board a memo, and I thought I'd step them through what an income tax levy, how it works, what it means to the district, and what we would have to do. So the first item, 2 types of income tax levies. The first one is traditional, and that starts with the Ohio income tax base, and that taxes most sources of income. The only one I'm not sure if it taxes would be Social Security, since you get a deduction on Ohio for that. Earned income only taxes wages and business income. It doesn't tax the pension, Social Security, interest, dividends, capital gains, other sources of income that aren't earned. In Ohio, there's 209 income tax levies. So that's a little over a third of the districts in Ohio have an income tax levy, and 62 of them are earned income taxes. So there's hang on one second. Hey, Mike, I'm going to mute you for a sec. Can you guys hear the feedback?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
All right. I'm not sure where it's coming now. All right. So I'm just going to go back to the presentation. We'll see if it keeps up. So there are, different rates of taxation that you can use. And these are all the revenue estimates I'm showing are based on an earned income tax. What you do is you try and figure out how much you want, and then the Ohio Department of Taxation will round that percentage to 0.25% of where you need to be. You can only pass an income tax levy in 0.25%. This slide shows the annual revenue of the different rates of an income tax levy once fully collected. Say once fully collected, since the revenue from an income tax levy is collected at a much slower rate in the first couple of years than a real estate tax levy. And I hope you can see this. We're going to try and blow it up a little. A levy passed in 2021, a calendar year 2021, will only collect about 5.9% of the estimated revenue in fiscal year 2022. You basically have 6 months worth of taxation, but only one payment. So 5.9% in the first year, 70.4 in the second. The reason the collections are paid to a district in a slower method is they are paid to the district on the last day of the month following the close of that quarter. So January, February, and March would be paid in April of 22. May, June, and April, May, and June of 22 would be paid in July of 22. That's the next fiscal year. So with an income tax levy, you're only going to get one payment, which should be a quarter, but it really doesn't work out that way. So the impact on our budget, it's a little slower. It impacts the budget at a little slower rate in the first couple of years, and then a little larger rate in the next as we're catching up for those first 2 years of under collection. So, and then this last slide here shows what the ending balances would be with an income tax levy. So if you look, even with it, we're still negative in the first year.
Right.
Because of that slow rate of collection. And then it slowly builds up steam, for lack of a better term. So, and then just to refresh everybody's memory, the real estate tax levy, you collect half of it in the you pass it in 21, you get about half of it in 22, fiscal year 22, and then a full amount in 23, 24, and 25, because taxes are paid half and half and remitted to the district by the end of that 6-month period. So the effect on the ending balance is just much greater. It offsets that negative balance much quicker. And then by the end of 25, 26, they're probably going to even themselves out. So, and real quick, 4.9, 4.99, here's the cost per month and the cost per year to a home that has a value of $100,000. Now this one, was there a question? Okay, I've only got 2 more slides. This slide shows the difference in collection percentages, just kind of laying out exactly what I said. 5.9 the first year, fiscal year 7.4. And then you see the balances are actually higher than 100% because it's that catch up. Here it's 50%, 100%, 100%. And then finally going to be almost impossible to see this. But this is the side-by-side comparison of an income tax levy. So at a 0.5% income tax, we're going to get 100,000 in the first year. A 4.9 mil levy is 926,000 the first year. 1.1, 1.83, and then it starts to turn the tide. And in the later years, it actually becomes more than the real estate tax levy because of that slower collection. So I just thought I would go through the board with that and see if there are any questions.
That was excellent response to the inquiry last 2 meetings. Yes, it was. Yeah, thank you. That's good stuff.
So Mike, I didn't, maybe I missed this slide where you said you're comparing to the average household of 100,000. Were you able to do that with income tax? Because I don't know how that would relate to the property value.
No, I'm not able to do that.
Okay.
Only because even if I can get, I'm sure there's a way to get the average earned income per household, but I don't know if we can extrapolate that to somebody making 50,000 lives in this type of house. That's going to be a calculation that each person would do, and which would benefit them or not benefit them. And one other thing, an earned income tax is not an employment tax. So it's only paid by the residents of the Madison School District. It's not paid by the employees. So we wouldn't be passing on a tax to everybody working in Madison. Only those people who live in Madison, regardless of where they work, would pay the tax.
And if we did an earned income tax levy, we're talking about folks who are actually working, not Social Security, not people on public pensions. Those sorts of folks would be excluded from paying that if we opted for that.
That's correct.
Okay.
And frankly, that one is easier to calculate. Everybody knows what they're making times whatever percent it is.
Right.
It gets a little muddier when you say, okay, now you need to include your interest and your dividends and everything else that might flow onto the front page of a tax return.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
Hey, Mike, with the real estate tax levy, it looked like our ending balance in 25 would still be negative.
At a 4.99 mil levy level, that is correct.
Okay.
Go ahead. I'm sorry.
No, but I was going to say, but with the income tax levy, it looked like we had a pretty strong ending balance at 25.
Yeah, at the higher percentages for, let me see if I can go up to that one where it's a full page. You know, it would take a 1.5% earned income tax levy to completely eliminate deficits in 24 and 25.
And Mike, this is based on the current forecast, correct? So it doesn't take anything into account of what we could possibly get from the ESSER, correct?
Correct. Yes, this is as it sat on September 21st, with the only change being the effects of revenue generated by either an income tax levy or real estate tax levy. For example, if we got the $1.4 million and the voters gave us a 0.5% income tax, this number, the 1.9, and we got the 1.4 million would go down to $500,000. You know, and then this number would drop by 500, and this one would drop by, by 1.4, 1.4, 1.4.
But we'd still be negative.
Correct.
Mike, if there was a way to do an example with the income tax credit, I think it'd be helpful for people to understand. Maybe just like one example.
So, I mean, an easy example would be somebody makes $50,000 there and a 1% tax levy. That would be a $500 tax payment withheld out of their pay over 12 months. which is the other advantage of an earned income tax levy, especially from a preparer standpoint. Your wages are your wages. They aren't subject to a reduction or an increase after the year is over. So if you're paying in whatever the rate is, chances are you're squared up at the end of the year. With a traditional, you pay in your wages, then there's some things that might reduce your income or increase your income, and you're always sending in a check for $5, $6, $10 to the state, and that becomes a pain in the butt for preparers and taxpayers.
Right. Okay. Thanks, Mike.
Did you have any conversation, at least we haven't yet, about the projected cost-cutting measures that we discussed at one board meeting? How you would, maybe have some, but mitigate all of them? I mean, how is this all going to come together, I guess?
Well, and I think in my memo, I talked about the uncertainty of those two major items. And,
Correct.
If we weren't getting any, we would probably have to stay away from an income tax levy and go to a real estate tax levy just because of the rate of collection, getting more in fiscal year 22, because even if we passed an income tax levy, we would still have to make cuts, which could turn into major cuts until we started collecting the money from that levy. So that it would be my recommendation that if we're not getting any help from either of those two sources, that we really can't do an income tax levy. Since we have those two possible sources of revenue, this at least gives us the opportunity to talk about an income tax levy, where before it was, we're falling off the cliff at the end of this year. We don't have time to wait for 103% or 105% collections to get us out. It's 3 years down the road. We don't have that kind of time. We do if we get help. So, and that's why in my memo, I've suggested, and, it's obviously it's up to the board, that if we don't know even whether or not we're getting the 1.4 million before next week, if the board decides they want to put a levy on the May ballot, the first resolution needs to be presented to the board next week. I think in my memo, I recommended that we put one on for both an income tax levy and a real estate tax levy, and then we pull one of them back. We would never go to the and put it on a ballot for both. We would have a decision made prior to us having to actually put it on the ballot. But I'd hate for us to say, okay, we're going to do an income tax levy and then none of this come in, and we still have to put $1.5 million. That's not very fair to our taxpayers and our students. And the other, could we do an income tax levy if people would rather have that? But we didn't pass the first levy timely, so now we can't even do that. So we're in such
you're recommending that as like a placeholder, right, Mike?
Yeah. I mean, it's not politically good to put two levies in front of the board, and people are going to think that we're putting two levies on. But because of the timeline, if we don't do both next week,
right,
we can only do the one the board voted on, and it may not be the better of the two options. We won't know that until at least the end of January. And, hopefully by the end of February, we'll know at least if we get the 1.4, we can do this, or if we're not getting it, we do the other. I'd have an opportunity to do something different. I'd hate for that to go by just because we don't want to have two resolutions on the agenda. Now, again, it's up to you five. If you don't like the idea of this board saying, hey, we're going to put two levies on, then I will give you a recommendation on which one I think we need to do.
And now, just because not everybody was here when we ran the last levy campaign, so they may not be aware, but Angela and I had spoke with a gentleman when we were at Capitol Conference, and then we ended up hiring him to help us.
Levy committee hired him.
Levy committee, excuse, yes, let me clarify that. By the name of Jerry. And when we spoke to Jerry, Jerry is someone who has helped several boards pass levies, and he did help us. We were able to succeed. But he had indicated before that an income tax levy was not the way to go, that generally property tax levies have a much better chance of passing. Now, do you have any reason to think that would be different now?
I don't have any information to the contrary.
There are more that are passing in recent years than not. When this historically, and I don't know, Mike, if you have that near you, but was it 2007? They tried an income tax levy here and it went down miserably. It was.
Yeah, it could be then. I know it hasn't been since 2011.
Might have been even before that. Might have been 5 or 6, but it's been a while, and it was too new and too confusing. A lot has changed.
So I just want to point out that we're at the end of the meeting, we're going to go into executive session and we're going to talk about some personnel matters that, potentially would result from, all these actions. And so we'll have a chance to talk about that. I just want to point that out. But, Mike, one of the things I wanted to ask you to talk a little bit about was that, and sorry, I didn't give you a heads up, just thought of it, but, I've lived in this town my whole life, nearly 50 years, despite my youthful appearance. I'll wait for the chuckles, but Gene's good for him. Folks are going to say, didn't you just pass a levy a few years ago? And what'd you do with the money? But I remember you saying that last meeting that our projections when we passed that levy, we're already a year beyond those, that we've already spent, been able to conserve money and do well. And I don't know if you could talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, I can. Actually, while we were talking, I called up the forecast I did right after we passed the levy in 2017. And it kept us solvent all the way through 2021, which is the year we're in now. We should have ended this year with about $1 million. Now, keep in mind, this is a forecast that is 5 years old. A lot has changed in 5 years. But if you take the simple fact that we should have ended with, let me add that to it, about $1.1 million. And in last year and this year, we've been cut $1 million by the state. We are dead on where we thought we would be when we passed that levy. It was supposed to get us through 2021, and it has. We didn't go crazy and start spending a bunch of money and run out of money a year or 2 years sooner. The money lasted us exactly about as long as we said it would back in 17.
I think that's helpful because, I know you and Angela and I and other board members and other folks in the district went out and talked, to a lot of groups about that levy and what it would mean. And we never saw that was a preserve and protect was the levy tagline, was just to basically keep what we have to the best we could. And we didn't go out and say we were going to expand. We didn't say this will last us 20 years. So I just think that's important for people to keep in mind, because folks have short-term memories and, it wasn't like we said, this is going to last us 15 years and now it lasted us 5. It's actually lasted us pretty much what we thought it would be, or what we thought it would, or even a little longer. So
let me correct what I just said, because I'm looking back at the forecast and the way the renewals are shown. I've got one where I've moved the renewal onto the front page. Our projected ending balance when we did this back in May of 17 for this year was $54,928. So we're about $11,000 off in 5 years with 20-some million dollars revenue and expenditures each year. So
with a budget cut,
with the $1 million budget cut. So we've done what we said we were going to do.
Thank you.
So wouldn't you need a motion tonight to come prepared for the vote next Tuesday on which levy or both?
I don't think I need a motion. I can have the attorney just draw them both up, but we will have to have a discussion on if it's a real estate tax levy, what the millage would be, and if it's an income tax levy, what the rate would be. And I don't know if that would be a discussion for next week. I don't believe before tonight I've given you the ending balances with the various types of levies, and I think you ought to have that in your hand, not just on the little screen that we're all staring at. So
Correct.
I think that needs to be factored into your decision on what type of levy and how much, if any levy.
Yeah, that'd be good. Well, and I know how I would vote as of tonight, but so where do we go from here?
I don't know. I think I get resolutions prepared, and they can be, if they're on the agenda, both of them or neither of them or whatever, the board can discuss them. If they, during the discussion of one, say they don't want that, they want the other one, you vote one resolution down and you approve the other one. And we only go forward with whatever one's been approved.
Okay.
I'm sorry.
No, go ahead, Michelle, you were first.
I was just going to ask, do we already have a meeting scheduled for next week?
We do.
Okay, because obviously we're going to need one.
Yes. Yeah, and I hate that we can't make a recommendation to say, this is the type we need in this amount. But, it'd be, again, a disservice to our taxpayers to ask for too much or too little and then have to cut in order to make up the balance or have the wrong type. And it's just, having $2.1 million floating out there could be available or could be nothing is, as I say, that's why treasurers and superintendents go gray.
Well, but realistically, with the numbers that you've given us, even with going forward with the levy, we're still going to have to make some cuts.
In the future, but you cut a little bit over a longer period of time and it gets you in the same place as having to slash $2 million to get us to the end of next year.
Right.
Right, but can we limit the agenda for next week and focus on process for the levy as well as these measures for the state? Because my concern is, we preach to the choir, and again, and I'm the idealist, but I just think in light of what Sean brought up, we all think it. We just passed it. We know the excellent job that you and Angela have done with the finances, but the public doesn't. And so this is where I was referring to the Business Advisory Council, getting more business people and people from the community to lay out, the facts and having some discussions. I know it's still COVID, but just having the discussion on the process of how we're going to go forward. I mean, if we're going to put something on in May, we've got to keep moving on that too. Either way, whichever one we go with, I think to just put some signs out without doing massive invites to the community to understand the good job we've done, and to have that discussion about, okay, so what cuts can we make from that, from those, that long list that you presented us with, Angela. And that's just going to take the board and time.
It is going to take some time.
It is going to take some time. And so, yeah, I'd like to, if there's any way to see a picture of how that's going to unfold, maybe next week is too soon, but I think February is.
Oh, no, absolutely. There has to be a timeline and a levy committee and all sorts of things that we will have to do.
Yeah.
So, Mike, I think to answer your question, yes, we can limit next week's agenda just to, items that are required so that, district business gets done. But we can have a full discussion about that. I do think that our executive session tonight might give you additional information to consider as far as how you want to vote for, levies moving forward in the next couple of weeks. But we can definitely limit the agenda so that that's our focus for next week. And obviously, Mike and Angela will both be prepared to, give us as much information as they can, in order for us to vote on that. So I think that's the primary business of the school board for the next 2 weeks, is to make these decisions. So I totally agree. We need as much information as we can. Mike emailed me a few times. Mike Vaccarello emailed me a couple of times over the last week asking, what information we want to present it. And I said, absolutely. We need as much information presented to the board so the board has many options as available for making these decisions. I didn't want to limit any information that I might get or anyone else. So we all have the same information. So that was where I was at.
Now, you didn't put on paper and make and give us, and I understand why initially, but is it possible, if we're going to discuss any cuts at all, that we could have that long list of potentialities that you had once presented to us a couple, 3 weeks back, Angela?
Let's talk in executive session.
Okay.
Yeah, the reason we talked about it is because it is executive session. It is people, we do have, it's affecting the compensation of public employees. So that's the reason why it's discussed in the executive session. My fear is once we distribute that list to a board member, it becomes a public document. And
once we're talking about, job titles, we're talking about people, and then we're talking about folks' compensation. And so that's stuff we need to talk about in executive session. But
gotcha. Okay.
That's just information for us to consider. I mean, obviously we cannot make any decisions in executive session about anybody's job. We have to make that in public session, but
correct.
So.
Right. Okay. Sounds good. Thank you.
Hey, Mike, do we know, wrong Mike, sorry. Do we know if mail-in ballots is going to be just an all the time thing now?
Well, there's always been the opportunity for absentee ballots for, used to have a reason for an absentee ballot. Now anybody can vote absentee. So I don't know if they're going, is the question, is there only going to be mail-in ballots this year? I have seen nothing to.
No, I just wonder if it's going to be as widespread as what it is, was.
It'll be an option for voters.
Ohio didn't change their
it's always been that way
for this election. So it's the same absentee or mail-in voting rules that we've had for several years for as long as they've been doing it, Michelle.
And then do we have any way, Angela, I know you said that when we talked before that you didn't think Jerry was still in the business and still.
No, he's not. He's retired.
I'm just curious, is there any, there may not be any information on it, but I'm curious to see how COVID affected the results for school districts trying to pass levies.
Did we get something from OSBA and BASA, our organizations, Mike, in November after the November election?
Yeah, they sent out an email. So
yeah, I thought they did. So
here's how many renewals were on and passed. Here's how many new.
Yeah.
So we usually get a little quick report after every election.
So we can look at that and what they were and.
That's all the questions I have.
Okay.
Good question, Michelle.
So if there are no further questions, that concludes my report for the evening. And I have nothing on the agenda to be voted on.
All right, thank you. Recommendations of the superintendent.
Well, I do have a report, I think, a quick one. I'm going to make mine quick. Just a quick update on the second semester startup. You know, we've had students transition back to buildings. Some of them have not been in a building since March. Overall, I've heard from our administrative team that the startup this week has been very good. As I shared with my school staff and I shared with the board before the meeting here, I have been home ill this week, working from home because I have cold symptoms, and I'm practicing what I preach with my staff is that, and community, that we want you to stay home when you're sick. We do not want to spread this. So I have gotten all the reports secondhand, but can't wait to get back where I can see kids in buildings. I'm very excited about that. Transportation, we've had a couple bumps this week. Nothing major, but in essence, when you're moving kids that have been virtual back onto buses and some students that went virtual that were in person at the secondary level, there have been a few, you know, rerouting that has had to be done. But for the most part, all buses this afternoon were at the middle school by 2:46. So, and in the morning, I think the last bus got in at 8:14 this morning. And we're shuttling kids between north and south to make sure classes have been balanced. So a lot of work had gone into getting ready for second semester. Our administrative team has done a phenomenal job making sure all those kinks have been worked out. As you saw in the update, we have had a area with sports that we've had to quarantine our wrestling team because of some positive cases. So they will not wrestle probably until after the end of next week. And we'll monitor that and make sure that the spread hasn't happened. We are working on our vaccine plan with the health district and other schools in Lake and Geauga County. There is a lot to build this infrastructure. The goal is to have our first vaccination clinics in Lake County in February. And again, this is all based on the availability of the vaccine. I am sending the commitment form to the state that we will have in-person learning March 1st. And what that means is basically what we're doing. Parents will still have the option to keep their kids remote, which they've done. And we have in-person option available to those who want it. It's a lot of moving parts with the vaccine. It's not your typical flu vaccine where we were able to, in a half, you know, what, 20 minutes, you know, you get your shot and you go. They can do 20 to 30 people every half hour. So there is a lot that has to be done to be prepared for that. I will keep you updated through the newsletter on that. And like I said, it's been exciting to see the kids and staff reactions on social media to being back in school. It's some good things are happening. Dave, do you have anything tonight?
I do not.
Okay.
Angela, yes. My internet cut out. So for a few minutes you were frozen. I couldn't hear anything. So I apologize if you had touched on this. But is all of our staff on board for getting this vaccine, or do we have some that are
of the people that we surveyed, we had 200 responses and 156 said yes. Doesn't mean that the other 100 didn't fill out that survey to the county. They'll have another opportunity to let us know if they want to do it or not. But I was pleased by the number.
Very good. And then I saw where Governor DeWine is no longer recommending that we quarantine students that are in the same classroom. if provided masks and social distancing were practiced. Has he made any recommendations about quarantine students for sports and things of that nature?
Yes, you've got to continue to quarantine for sports because they are not wearing masks and they are in close contact. So
and
that's
then,
why we're quarantining them.
And then regarding the quarantine in the classroom, we have a doctor that we have been consulting with.
Yes.
How does he feel about that? Do we continue to quarantine in the classroom or not continue to quarantine the classroom?
I think he was early on with us when we had some cases early on that said you didn't have to quarantine the whole classroom as long as you're doing all the things that are in the guidance.
Okay.
So you wouldn't be quarantining whole classes of students anymore. You may have to quarantine a couple kids here or there. And Dave, you did talk to Tanya from the health department yesterday in regards to the wrestling. So do you want to add anything to that, or?
In terms of sports, there is a little bit longer quarantine period because of no masks. In terms of athletics, if you have had an exposure or symptoms, you are quarantined for the full 14 days and you return on day 15. If you do have to quarantine from the classroom, either because you had symptoms or you had a close exposure from the classroom, it's now 10 days quarantine and you return to school on the 11th day. And each situation is really case by case. How close were they? Were they masked? For how long was the close exposure? Really, you're going to ask a lot of questions that the specific situation is going to draw you to the answer.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. You ready for the recommendations then?
We are.
Okay. Under the personnel motion this evening, I'm asking you to accept the retirement resignation of Linda Gross, special education aide at South Elementary, effective December 21st, 2020, after 21 years of service. I'm asking you to enter into the following employment contracts. Jack Whaley as 9th grade wrestling coach and Jocelyn Kilpatrick as MMS advisor to the fall play. And to approve the transfer of Don Jones from an 8-hour second shift custodial position at Madison Middle School to an 8-hour second shift position at North Elementary School. And to approve the transfer of Roy Schlee, an 8-hour second shift custodial position at Madison High School, to an 8-hour second shift position at Madison Middle School.
Is there a motion?
I'll move.
Is there a second? Any discussion? Roll call.
Michael Howry.
Yes.
Michelle Hayes.
Yes.
Brian Horvath.
Yes.
Dean Sensi.
Yes.
Don Douglas.
Yes.
Vote is 5-0.
And the next item under the recommendations is to a board resolution regarding 2020 2021 evaluations, asking you to deem it impractical in this case with the shutdown that we've had the last couple months, and not being able for our administrators to meet some of those timelines, to allow us that flexibility to not evaluate staff in this school year.
Is there a motion?
I'll move.
Second.
Any discussion?
I completely understand the administrators not being able to meet that timeline. I am concerned that we would not be doing evaluations. So I would rather it be that we are still doing evaluations, we're just not meeting that timeline.
They don't count then.
Well, I don't care if they count, but do they count for
us?
us?
And in all honesty,
concerned with the state. I'm concerned about just making
but
sure.
that's where we have to report them. That's the tool we use. And
Okay.
And so it becomes, because it's in their online system, we don't have a paper form of what we're doing. We're still meeting with staff. We're still aware of what staff's doing. If I felt that there were staff that we needed to non-renew, I wouldn't bring this resolution to you.
Well, I guess that's what I need to have the reassurance of, is that our administrators are still, they may not be formally evaluating our
They're
staff.
always in those classrooms. They're talking to staff. They're checking with the online learning. This just allows them those the flexibility of not having to jump through the state hoops.
Okay.
So as far as additional discussion, you know, I work in human resources during my daytime life, and I don't want evaluations that aren't completely legitimate. And, you know, oftentimes performance evaluations are inflated. The folks doing them are uncomfortable. You know, yeah, somebody you have to work with on a day-to-day basis, and then you're giving them a bad evaluation. That's not what this is. This is simply that we can't effectively do it in these situations. You know, now, that doesn't mean that our administrators don't know what teachers need additional aids, assistance, monitoring. That's going to be in any workforce. It doesn't matter whether it's education or any other. We know those teachers that need us, you know, to help them a little bit more, need mentoring. We know those folks. And, you know, so I'm confident that Angela has a handle on who she needs to assist a little bit more, and who needs, I know I said it a number of times, additional assistance. You know what I mean? I'm confident of that. But, you know, trying to evaluate people effectively while they're doing online teaching, this is just, it's very, very cumbersome. So I support that. So are there any other additional discussion? All right, roll call.
Michelle Hayes,
Yes.
Brian Horvath,
Yes.
Dean Sensi,
Yes.
Sean Douglas,
Yes.
Michael Howery.
Yes.
Vote is 5-0.
Under the consent calendar tonight, there's 3 items. The first is, the first 2 deal with our standard. This is the time of year to enter into our college credits plus agreements. And the first one is with Lakeland Community College to provide college credit plus services effective May 17th, 2021 through May 16th, 2022. And to enter into a partnership agreement between the Madison Local School District and Kent State University to provide college credit plus services effective July 1st, 2021 through June 30th, 2022. And then to enter into a consultant services contract for Vince Primer as a boys basketball coach at a cost of $2,400 through a donation from the Rebounders Club.
I'll move.
Second.
Any discussion? Roll call.
Brian Horvath,
Yes.
Dean Sensi,
Yes.
Sean Douglas,
Yes.
Michael Howery,
Yes.
Michelle Hayes.
Yes.
Vote is 5-0.
All right, we'll now open the second public participation portion for the evening. This is on any item. Anyone wishing to address the board on any item would be able to do so. 5 minutes. If you could state your name and address for the board, please.
Sean, I'm going to do what I did before and give everybody the ability to unmute themselves if they so choose.
Okay.
And they have that ability now. I'm seeing nothing.
All right. Okay. Okay, we'll now close the public participation portion. So we're looking for a motion to move into executive session for the appointment, employment, dismissal, discipline, promotion, demotion, or compensation of public employees or regulated individuals, or the investigation of charges or complaints against a public employee or regulated individual unless such person requests a public hearing. We have a motion?
I'll move. Second.
All right. Any discussion? All right, we will not be returning, as Michelle always reminds me to tell folks, we will not be returning to conduct any business once executive session has concluded. So roll call.
Gene Senthi.
Yes.
John Douglas.
Yes.
Michael Howry.
Yes.
Michelle Hayes.
Yes.
Ryan Horvath.
Yes.
Vote is 5-0.
All right, we stand in recess.
1 second to stop the recording.
I am going to excuse myself for a minute. I'll be right back.
I'm going to go get a